Hello, today I'm going to do a sketch of a tree using watercolour pencils. First of all, on the desk here I have my tools and materials. I have Derwent watercolour pencils. I've already pre-selected my colours, as you can see in the tin here. Sometimes when I'm working I might actually choose a few different colours, but I'll probably stick with those today. The brushes I'm using are the Derwent water brushes. These are brushes with water in the handle. And all I do to get those going is just give that a squeeze. The great thing about those is you don't have to carry a bottle of water around with you when you're out sketching. To start with, I'm going to just do a very rough sketch of the tree with my graphite pencil. And the paper I'm working on is a 140-pound Bockingford watercolour paper, not surface. So just to begin with, just start off by doing the sketch of the tree. The reason I'm using this HB pencil is that it is actually slightly easier to rub out than the watercolour pencil. So very quickly, rough sketch of the outline of the tree. Put the trunking down there. I'm not going to press down too hard with the HB pencil, otherwise I could end up with a black outline. You'll notice even at this stage I have a very broken edge to the tree. One of the biggest problems people have with trees is the fact that they end up with a green blob. That's normally to do with the way that the tree has been drawn initially. So even at this early stage, I will do a rough outline. So starting with blue, this is a spectrum blue, I'm going to start putting in some sky. So roughly sketching this in. Now, because I'm going to wet this slightly, I'm not particularly worried about pencil marks showing up. Most of those will disappear when I run the brush over it. It's probably worthwhile before you do this, if you're not used to working with these, is to actually test these down the side of your paper, just to make sure that you're happy with the colour, because the colour comes out when you wet the pencil on the paper. Now these are a watercolour based medium, so in order to produce white clouds, what I have to do is produce or leave the white space, just like you would in watercolour. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. Now what I'm planning on doing here is putting down a basic layer of colour over everything and then running the brush over it, and after that's dried I'll then work back over the top with more colour. So the next stage I'm going to do is very lightly over the tree I'm using May green. This is the initial light colour, so like I said earlier, this is just like watercolour, so you work from light to dark, and I'm going to put some on the grassy field underneath as well. Go over the trunk, that's going to be darker later on. Now the colours look quite pale at the moment. What you don't want to do is put too much colour on, because even at this stage it's very difficult to know whether you've put enough colour on or whether you put too much on. You'll find that out when you run the brush over the paint. So using mineral green, I'm just going to put in some distant trees here. Mineral green is a darker green, so I mustn't press down too hard. It's also a bluer green, which will help create the sense of distance. So now I'm going to put a little bit of mineral green on the tree as well. Now my light, I'm going to have that coming from the right, so this side of the tree here won't have so much of the mineral green on it. Now what I'm going to do now is run the wet brush over it. So choosing the larger of the brushes, there we go, giving it a squeeze to get some water into the actual brush itself. Keep the tissue in my hand just in case I need it, and scrub the colour, and immediately you can see the colour coming out. And the good thing about these brushes, you don't get a huge amount of water coming out the end, so you're not flooding the paper with water. Let's give it a clean and another squeeze to make it a little bit wetter. So as the blue goes up to the edge of the tree, I've just got to make sure that I maintain that broken edge. Let's give that another squeeze. And over the tree, and you can start to see the green coming out. Again, give it another squeeze, clean. Just very carefully on the distant trees. What I don't want is too much brush mark showing up in these distant trees. Distant tree line. Okay, now most of my colour has been wet, and you can see on the paper, on the picture itself, that I've still got some of my pencil marks showing up. This is not a problem. I like this. It adds texture to the actual sketch. I don't really want to disguise the fact that I'm working with a pencil. What I'm going to do now, just let that dry for a minute or two, and then I'll do the final stages. Okay, now this is nice and dry now. The reason I dried it first of all is because if you work with the pencil on top of wet or damp paper, it can actually leave a very strong mark that you can't get rid of. So I prefer to actually dry the first layer colour before moving on to the next. So what I'm going to do now is move on, put stronger colour in, wet that, dry it, and then finish off with some dry pencil. So I'm moving on again to my mineral green. This is the darker green that I've already used, but I'm pressing down a lot harder this time. And I like to use a scribble technique. This is a sketch, so the act of scribbling on here does actually emphasize the sketchiness of the picture. I'm not going to do any more on the distant trees because that will pull them forward too much. So working into the shadow areas and just lightly coming across to the lighter area. This maintains the three-dimensional quality of the sketch. The light's coming from the right, so the light's on the right-hand side of the tree, the dark's on the left. And what I'm going to do in that in a minute is go in with a dark blue, just to emphasize the darker areas even more. I'm going to put a few little branches in through here. There we go. So I'm going to pick up a Prussian blue. Now, the darker you go, the less really you should put on, because when you wet this, it's going to go very strong. One of the things about watercolour pencils is getting used to how much colour you can actually put on before you wet. Now, this technique, I'm working, as I said earlier, on 140-pound Bockingford knot surface, cold pressed paper. What I'm doing here, and the amount of water I'm working with, you can actually work on a smooth cartridge paper if you wanted to. Obviously, if you're working on a smooth cartridge paper, they do tend to be thinner, the papers, so you wouldn't use so much water. So that's the Prussian blue. What I'm going to do now is wet that very carefully and then go in with my final dark colour. So using the brush again, give it a squeeze, get the water into the brush, and just using the point of the brush this time, a dabbing motion so that I don't spread the paint around too much. When you put this amount of colour on and then you wet it, it's very difficult to know how much colour is actually going to you're actually going to start moving around. So if you're too vigorous with the brush, you could end up filling an entire area with your dark colour. So if you've not worked with these before, always practice first, scrap piece of paper, just to get the hang of how much colour goes on the paper. And especially with the knot surface, because it's got a texture which takes more of the colour off the end of the pencil. Down the side of the tree trunk. Now if I can actually spread some of this colour around a little bit to create a shadow underneath the tree. There we go. Okay, that's strong enough. What I'm going to do now is dry that off again and then put some final touches to it. Okay, the painting is dry now, so what I'm going to do, final touches, is just dry pencil. So picking up the black is the strongest colour. I don't like wetting this because it's very strong, so this is just going to be dry pencil into some of these shadow areas, and this just gives this whole bit a little bit of a kick, increases the contrast, and just gives the sketch a little bit more punch. So across underneath here, because obviously the tree is always dark underneath, down the side of the trunk, and a little bit along here, just a little bit of shading for the shadow under the tree. I will add some grey to that. The black's a little bit strong for that sort of thing. Whilst I've got the black in my hand, a couple of little birds flying up here. There we go. So I've got a colour in here called gunmetal, which I can use for the shadow on the grass. It's softer than the black and a little bit stronger than the green. I could have wetted that if I wanted to, but I think I'll leave that as it is. One word about the white. People often ask me about the white. You can use it, but you need a fair amount of colour on here for it to show up. If I needed any areas in here that I just wanted to soften off, I can do. If you soften off with the black, with the white on top of the black, it just knocks it back a little bit, like that. And finally, I think just for a little bit of scale, let's go back to the black, put a little fence in. There you go, a little rickety fence. And there is a sketch of a tree with watercolour pencil.